Vatican City is an inspirational place. You don't need to be Catholic or even religious to appreciate the architecture, the art, and the city's historical significance.
What if 300 years of history never happened? What if ancient cities were erased by nuclear fire long before our textbooks begin? And what if the Vatican holds proof of all this, hidden deep beneath its marble floors? This is not just another story about lost civilizations. It's a journey into the cracks of time where truth fades, history bends, and the past we know might be a carefully crafted illusion. The Phantom Time Hypothesis. Imagine waking up tomorrow and being told that the year isn't 2025, but actually 1725. That everything we know between 614 and 911 AD never happened at all. No kings, no wars, no castles rising across Europe. Just 300 phantom years slipped into our calendar like a glitch in reality.
This is called the Phantom Time Hypothesis. Okay, let's look at the calendar and see if we can figure out what the heck is going on with Phantom Time.
It sounds impossible, like a late-night internet theory. But this is exactly what German historian Heribert Illig proposed in the early 90s. His idea became known as the Phantom Time Hypothesis, and it's one of the strangest, most daring challenges ever made to our understanding of history. According to Illig, those 3 missing centuries were not an accident. They were inserted intentionally into our timeline by some of the most powerful men in medieval Europe. Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII. Their alleged motive? To rewrite the year to match a symbolic goal, to make it the year 1000 AD, the perfect divine number for a new Christian millennium. By doing so, Illig claimed, they didn't just lie about dates, they reshaped reality itself. If true, the early Middle Ages, that shadowy period after Rome's collapse, would be nothing more than a long, fabricated chapter in the human story. To Illig, the evidence was hiding in plain sight. He began with architecture. Across those so-called dark centuries, very little seemed to evolve. Cathedrals, fortresses, and city layouts looked almost frozen in style and method. For a time supposedly filled with invention and rebuilding, the archaeological silence was deafening. There were fewer ruins, fewer inscriptions, and strangely little written documentation that could be pinned down with absolute certainty. Then came the calendar problem. The modern Gregorian calendar replaced the older Julian one in 1582. But the correction Pope Gregory made didn't quite match the expected shift in the stars. There was an 11-day discrepancy, small, but enough for Illig to raise an eyebrow. If our dating of ancient and medieval events was accurate, he argued, that misalignment shouldn't exist. To him, it was proof that somewhere, time itself had been stretched or altered on paper. And then there was Charlemagne, the larger-than-life ruler who supposedly united Europe and revived the Western Empire. Illig believed this emperor never truly existed. He claimed Charlemagne was a composite, a carefully constructed myth combining bits of earlier kings, legends, and papal propaganda. Even his statues and biographies, Illig said, looked suspiciously idealized, more like a story told backward than a life recorded forward. Of course, mainstream historians were outraged. They accused Illig of cherry-picking coincidences and ignoring evidence that didn't fit. Coins, documents, dendrochronology, tree ring dating, and astronomical records all placed events squarely where they belonged. Archaeologists pointed out that material culture does change, but not everywhere, and not always evenly. The quiet centuries may have looked still only because few survived to record them. And yet, the idea wouldn't die. People are drawn to theories that shake the foundation of what we take for granted. The phantom time hypothesis isn't just about missing years. It's about the fragility of human memory. The thought that our entire timeline could be manipulated by those in power touches something primal. After all, history isn't a photograph. It's a story told and retold, edited and polished, often by the victors. So what if a few men, armed with faith and ambition, decided to tweak that story, to declare themselves rulers of the millennial age, to align their reigns with prophecy, to bend time itself into a symbol of divine order? That's the eerie beauty of Illig's theory. It doesn't just accuse empires of lying, it suggests that reality itself can be rewritten if enough people agree on the lie. Imagine the world before clocks, before printed calendars, before standardized dates. Time was fluid, measured by harvests, moon cycles, and reigns of kings. If a ruler declared, "It is now the year 1000," who could prove otherwise? There was no universal ledger, no internet to fact-check, no public archives accessible to all. The keepers of time were the same institutions that kept the keys to heaven, the church and the empire. And this is where Illig's theory slips from absurdity into possibility. Because the deeper question isn't whether he's right, it's whether such a thing could have happened. Could 3 centuries of history be faked, adjusted, or lost without us ever knowing? Could entire generations be swallowed by a bureaucratic or religious rewrite? The uncomfortable answer is maybe. Our past is only as real as the records that survive and who keeps them. Fire, war, plague, censorship, or even simple decay can erase lifetimes. Empires have rewritten dates before. Monarchs have renamed years. Emperors have altered calendars to mark divine events. And religions have revised their own histories for centuries. When Illig asked, "What if time itself is the biggest forgery of all?" it struck a nerve. Most historians still dismiss him as eccentric, but his question lingers in the dark corners of historical thought. Because if time can be forged, if the world we know rests on fabricated centuries, then every piece of history, from our heroes to our faith, might be built on a lie that was simply too elegant to question. If missing centuries hint that history can be rewritten, Fomenko takes that idea further, questioning almost every timeline we thought we knew. The rewriting of civilization. If Heribert Illig questioned 3 missing centuries, Russian mathematician Anatoly Fomenko went further. He questioned almost everything. To him, it wasn't just that part of history was fake. It was that most of it was a copy, rearranged and retold like a script reused by different empires. Fomenko wasn't a historian. He was a mathematician with a gift for patterns. In the 70s, while studying ancient astronomical records, he noticed something strange. The star positions described in old chronicles didn't match the supposed dates. Lunar eclipses and planetary alignments that were said to have happened in the 1st century lined up instead with events 1,000 years later. To Fomenko, this wasn't coincidence. It was proof that the entire historical timeline was off by centuries. He began to suspect that ancient and medieval history overlapped, that they were the same stories told twice under different names. Rome, Byzantium, the Holy Roman Empire. He believed they weren't separate civilizations at all, but mirror images of one another. The same kings, the same wars, the same legends, copied and renamed across time by chroniclers who didn't realize they were duplicating the past. It was an idea so radical that it made Illig's missing centuries look modest. Fomenko and his team used statistics, astronomy, and textual analysis to map recurring historical echoes. They noticed that dynasties in different eras followed suspiciously similar timelines: the rise of a conqueror, the splintering of empires. the fall into chaos. To him, this wasn't random. It was a pattern of repetition created when later scribes tried to reconstruct earlier centuries from corrupted sources. The result of his research was the New Chronology, a sweeping rewrite of world history. In Fomenko's version, most of the ancient world, Egypt, Greece, Rome, and even the biblical era never existed in the distant past. Instead, it all unfolded between the 11th and 16th centuries. Yes, you read that right. He argued that Jesus lived in the 12th century, that ancient Rome was actually medieval Rome under a different name, and that the Old Testament described the same events as the New, only seen through another lens. To Fomenko, world history wasn't a long, steady march from antiquity to modernity. It was a condensed loop, a handful of centuries stretched out into thousands by chroniclers who copied each other's mistakes. It's hard not to be fascinated, even if you don't believe it. His ideas blend mystery, mathematics, and rebellion against academic authority. He wasn't trying to sell conspiracy. He was trying to prove that even the most sacred institutions of knowledge could be built on flawed data. To him, the Church, early historians, and later European powers had a reason to extend the past, to make their roots appear older, nobler, more divine. 1,000 extra years could turn a modest kingdom into an ancient empire. It could give religious events cosmic weight, placing them at the dawn of time. And again, the Vatican stands in the shadows of the theory. In Fomenko's story, the keepers of ancient manuscripts, monks, bishops, papal archivists, became the editors of human memory. Whether they acted from faith or politics, they decided what counted as ancient and what didn't. Mainstream historians call Fomenko's theory a grand illusion. They say his data correlations are forced, his astronomy misread, his conclusions impossible. But his followers, numbering in the thousands online, see him as a modern Galileo, punished for challenging a church of historians instead of theologians. Because at the heart of his work lies a question too powerful to ignore. What if history isn't a record, but a construction? Think about it. We trust our history the way we trust our maps. But maps can lie. They can stretch distances, hide borders, and make the center of the world wherever the cartographer decides. History works the same way. It's drawn by people, for people, with motives, fears, and agendas. If you peel back enough layers, every civilization begins to look like another one. Great cities rise, burn, rebuild. Religions promise salvation. Empires promise peace, and both leave ruins behind. The names change, but the story feels eerily familiar. Maybe Fomenko just took that observation too literally. Or maybe he touched on something real, that human history repeats not just metaphorically, but mathematically. That we're not looking at a straight line of progress, but at a spiral, where the same archetypes keep reappearing. The empire builder, the prophet, the betrayer, the flood, the fall. Whether you think Fomenko is a visionary or a madman, his work forces you to face an uncomfortable truth. History isn't sacred. It's editable. It's vulnerable to the same distortions as memory. And like memory, it can be rewritten, polished, and reshaped until even we start believing the new version. And once that happens, it's no longer just a theory about the past. It's a warning about the present. Because if history can be rewritten once, who's to say it isn't being rewritten again? Right now, before our eyes. Nuclear echo of ancient civilizations. If you walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, the ancient city in modern-day Pakistan, something feels off. Streets are laid out with mathematical precision. Drains and homes show an understanding of sanitation centuries ahead of their time. But the most unsettling detail isn't what stands, it's what lies beneath. Archaeologists discovered skeletons scattered across the streets, many of them fused to the ground as if frozen mid-motion. Some showed traces of radiation far above natural levels. Nearby, bricks were found melted together, like they had been hit by an intense blast of heat, so fierce it turned sand into glass. To some scientists, this was evidence of catastrophe. To others, it whispered of something stranger, an ancient nuclear war. The idea sounds absurd at first, sci-fi more than science. But once you start connecting the dots, the line between myth and possibility begins to blur. Ancient Indian epics like the Mahabharata and Ramayana describe weapons so terrifying they could vaporize armies and darken the skies. One passage speaks of a projectile brighter than 1,000 suns, releasing wind and fire that reduced cities to ash. The ground, it says, became poisoned, and survivors had to wash themselves and their belongings to escape the sickness of hair and nails falling out. To a modern reader, it's hard not to hear the echoes of radiation poisoning. But India isn't the only place where history seems to hum with radioactive memory. In Scotland, archaeologists found what they call vitrified forts, stone walls melted into glass, as if torched by unimaginable heat. In parts of Siberia and North Africa, there are ancient craters with traces of fused sand similar to nuclear test sites. Even in Libya's desert, green glass stretches for miles, known today as Libyan desert glass. Scientists say it was formed by a meteor impact. Others aren't so sure. Because what if these weren't natural disasters? What if they were the scars of forgotten wars, fought not with swords, but with technology we can't even begin to understand? The theory goes like this. Thousands of years ago, advanced civilizations, perhaps predating Sumer or Egypt, reached a level of science that rivaled our own. They unlocked the atom long before the 20th century. And like us, they couldn't control it. A single war, or even an accident, could have wiped out everything: cities, people, and memory itself. What would survive after such an apocalypse? Maybe a few oral traditions, maybe stories of gods hurling thunderbolts from heaven, maybe myths of divine punishment or the flood that reset the world. In other words, our mythology might be the fossilized memory of a nuclear age we've already lived through. Mainstream archaeology disagrees, of course. Scientists explain the melted stones as the result of natural fires, meteors, or lightning strikes. The radiation levels in Mohenjo-Daro, they say, are within acceptable margins, nothing nuclear. But that doesn't erase the discomfort of how familiar those myths sound. Why do so many cultures, scattered across the globe, describe gods of fire, weapons of light, and skies that turned to darkness? Maybe they weren't describing gods at all, just people like us, armed with something they couldn't control. In that light, the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro become less like an archaeological site and more like a warning, a whisper from a world that destroyed itself and left us only stories. And this connects eerily with Illig and Fomenko's visions of history. If entire centuries can vanish or be rewritten, then why not entire civilizations? What if our own prehistory, the so-called blank spaces before the rise of Sumer and Egypt, wasn't empty at all, but simply erased? It's possible that we're living in the aftermath of not the first, but the second or third cycle of civilization. The nuclear ruins are the footprints of our ancestors' mistakes, buried deep enough that by the time humanity re-emerged, we mistook their world for myth. It's a thought that keeps you up at night, because it suggests that history isn't a ladder, it's a loop. Humanity rises, builds, destroys itself, forgets, and starts over. Each time we think we're the first, the smartest, the chosen ones, we might just be another rerun in an endless cosmic cycle. When you look at those glassy ruins, you start to wonder, are we uncovering our ancient past or glimpsing our own future? Lost continents and drowned memory. Every map hides something. What we see is only the part that survived the water. When scientists announced that a vast drowned continent called Zealandia had been found beneath the Pacific, it felt like the planet was confessing a secret. 94% of this eighth continent lies underwater, stretching from New Zealand down into the deep blue. For millions of years, it was thought to be just seafloor. Then researchers realized it had once stood above the waves. A real, physical world now sleeping beneath kilometers of ocean. The discovery jolted the imagination.
All of these have still left out a continent, the eighth continent, the continent of Zealandia. Within the Pacific Ocean lies a scrap of continental crust that is raised more than 1 kilometer higher than the surrounding oceanic crust.
If a whole continent can vanish, what else have we lost? Ancient myths from every culture tell of lands swallowed by the sea. Atlantis, described by Plato, the island of kings that fell in a single night of fire and water. Lemuria, a supposed bridge between India and Madagascar, home to an advanced race erased by earthquakes. In southern India, Tamil legends speak of Kumari Kandam, a cradle of civilization drowned beneath the Indian Ocean. For centuries, scholars dismissed these stories as poetic exaggeration, allegories of moral decay, not geology. But as satellite imaging and oceanography advanced, fragments of those fables began to look uncomfortably literal. Beneath the waves off Japan, near Yonaguni, lies a massive stone structure that looks carved by human hands, terraces, pillars, and stairways leading into the abyss. Near Cuba, sonar once detected symmetrical ruins buried in the Caribbean depths. In the Indian Ocean, around Dwarka, archaeologists found ancient walls and artifacts carbon-dated to thousands of years before known coastal settlements. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe these are the ghost fingerprints of worlds that once were. Civilizations erased not by time, but by water. Imagine standing at the edge of one of those vanished continents. The air is thick with salt, the sky blazing orange, and somewhere on the horizon, the ocean starts to pull away. People watch as the earth trembles. The sea roars back like a living thing, swallowing temples, forests, and memory all at once. Those who survive have nothing left but stories. Stories of angered gods, of floods sent to cleanse the world, of towers struck down by heaven. Thousands of years later, we find those same stories carved in different tongues, different continents. The flood of Noah, the deluge of Deucalion, the Mesoamerican flood of Tlaloc, the Sumerian flood of Utnapishtim. The details shift, but the message is always the same. We lost something vast, and we remember it only in myth. Geologists now say cataclysmic sea level rises did occur around 12,000 years ago, when the last ice age ended. Whole coastlines disappeared. The Black Sea may have been a freshwater lake before a sudden flood from the Mediterranean. Entire human settlements would have been erased overnight. And yet, in the world of science, these remain data points, dates, depths, sediment lines. It's myth that keeps the emotional memory alive. That's the beauty and the tragedy of lost continents. They're both scientific possibility and psychic wound. They remind us that the Earth is restless, that history isn't just written on paper, but on shifting ground. If Illig and Fomenko warned that time could vanish, the drowned continents whisper that space can too. You can erase a century by rewriting calendars, But you can erase a civilization by raising the tide. Think of the Vatican's archives again. Their endless corridors of parchment and silence. Maybe within those shelves are records of sailors who saw new lands rise and old ones sink. Maybe the Church once held maps of a world that no longer exists, continents now baptized by the sea. After all, faith and flood have always been connected. Every deluge is both punishment and rebirth. And perhaps that's what the ocean symbolizes in all these tales. Not destruction, but reset. The world drowns, the slate is wiped clean, and humanity starts again. Forgetful, smaller, but carrying fragments of the old world like seashells in its pocket. Every myth, every submerged ruin, every sonar image flickering on a deep-sea monitor tells us the same thing. We've been here before. We built, we drowned, we rebuilt. Maybe that's why the ocean still unsettles us. Because somewhere beneath those waves lies proof that civilization is not permanent, that everything we've built could vanish by morning, leaving future archaeologists to wonder who we were and why we disappeared. And if time itself can be rewritten, where better to hide its proof than in the shadowy vaults of the Vatican? The Vatican's secret archives, the Library of Time. If the ocean hides lost continents, the Vatican hides lost time. Deep beneath St. Peter's Basilica lies a labyrinth of corridors. Corridors lined with shelves that stretch for miles, holding over 85 kilometers of documents. They call it the Vatican Secret Archives, but the name is misleading. It's not just secret. It's sacred, forbidden, almost mythical.
You have to wonder if the secret library at the Vatican, which they acknowledge exists, doesn't have records or chronicles about extraterrestrial contacts.
For centuries, scholars and treasure hunters have dreamed of glimpsing what's inside. Papal correspondence, state papers, heretical manuscripts, records of excommunications, letters from kings and queens long dead. There are maps that might show pre-Columbian America, chronicles of forgotten empires, and perhaps whispers of centuries that never existed. The Church insists the archives are safe, preserved for history, not hidden to deceive. But human nature and history itself suggests otherwise. When power and knowledge intersect, secrecy is a form of control. And if the phantom time hypothesis or Fomenko's new chronology is even half right, could it be that the Vatican has been the ultimate editor of human memory? Some historians speculate that these archives contain proof of the 300 missing years. Others whisper that there are records of technologies and civilizations far older than official history admits. Machines, maps, and writings that hint at nuclear devastation long before our era. Perhaps the Church preserved knowledge too dangerous to release, waiting for a time when humanity could handle it, or perhaps waiting to ensure it never sees the light at all. The imagination runs wild. One corridor might contain letters from emperors explaining the phantom centuries, carefully coordinated to make the year 1000 appear divine. Another might hold manuscripts from ancient sailors who saw continents rise and sink, scribbling warnings about the fragility of human memory. Somewhere else, behind iron gates, could be accounts of astronomical events, lunar eclipses, comets, planetary alignments that contradict every history book in circulation. The idea is intoxicating. A single institution holding the keys to time itself. If calendars can be rewritten, empires faked, civilizations drowned, then archives like these are the vaults where the truth sleeps, or perhaps where it's deliberately kept in shadow. Many who have glimpsed even a fraction of the archives describe a feeling of vertigo. It's not just the age of the documents, it's the weight of possibility. Every scroll, every parchment, every meticulously inked page could rewrite what we think we know about the past. You could spend a lifetime tracing the history of a single city and realize that everything you learned in school was an echo, a story filtered through centuries of selective memory. And yet, even the Vatican's secrecy is a paradox. Knowledge so carefully protected can inspire the imagination, fueling conspiracy, speculation, and theories. Fomenko's mathematics, Illig's phantom centuries, the myths of Atlantis and Kumari Kandam, they all gain a shadow of plausibility when you imagine a vault beneath the Vatican where the erased and forbidden histories quietly wait. It's not just about curiosity, it's about power. Whoever controls the past controls the present. If entire centuries can be faked, if civilizations can be erased or remembered selectively, then history becomes a tool. And the Vatican, with its unparalleled archives, might be the greatest storyteller of all. Step outside the archives into St. Peter's Square. The tourists smile, cameras click, the world moves as it always has. But beneath their feet, in silence and darkness, lies proof that time is not a straight line. It is fragile, bendable, and perhaps deliberately edited. The Church is not the only institution that shapes history, but it is one of the oldest, the most patient, and the most mysterious. And so the archives remain, closed to most, whispered about by some, and imagined by everyone else. They are a reminder that history is not absolute, that our past may be less ours than we think, and that the line between truth and fabrication is thinner than a papyrus scroll. Every secret document, every forbidden manuscript, every map tucked into a hidden corner tells the same story. Knowledge is power, memory is malleable, and the world we know is only one version of a story that could have been told differently. The machinery of historical control. History is a story we tell ourselves, but who holds the pen? From the phantom centuries to nuclear ruins and sunken continents, one pattern emerges. Memory is fragile, and someone is always shaping it. Civilization isn't just built from stone and ink, it's constructed from the stories we accept as truth. Empires, kings, and religious institutions have always understood this. Dates, events, and heroes can be adjusted to justify rule. A conquered people's past can be erased. A ruler's glory can be magnified. Charlemagne might have been invented. Ancient Rome might have been medieval Rome all over again. The Vatican archives might hold centuries we are not meant to know. All of this points to a simple, terrifying reality. History can be manipulated as easily as paper in a scribe's hands. Even natural disasters can be absorbed into this machinery. Floods, fires, earthquakes, or mysterious radioactive ruins can be reframed as divine punishment or mythic allegory. Stories of gods hurling weapons from the sky might be coded memories of real catastrophes, stripped of context and authority by the people who survived, and later, by those who wrote the history books. Control over history isn't just about preserving the past, it's about controlling the present. If you dictate what people believe about their origins, their heroes, and their failures, you dictate how they see themselves. You define loyalty, morality, and purpose. Rewrite the timeline, and you can rewrite identity itself. And this machinery is subtle. It doesn't always erase with fire or sword. Often it edits quietly, A forged document here, a misdated manuscript there, centuries later repeating the same story under new names. Fomenko saw this mathematically. Illig saw it chronologically. Both saw a pattern. Humans are susceptible to the illusion of continuity. If everyone agrees on the lie, it becomes truth. The machinery also thrives on secrecy. The Vatican archives, restricted for centuries, are a perfect example. Knowledge stored away, inaccessible, becomes legend. Rumors fill gaps. Myths and theories flourish. The less we can see, the more fertile our imagination becomes, and the more entrenched the power of those who hold the keys. It's easy to dismiss these ideas as conspiracy, but the machinery doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be plausible. Entire civilizations could vanish. Centuries could be fabricated. Continents could sink. And yet most people would continue believing the official story. After all, most of history is learned secondhand, through teachers, textbooks, and institutions with agendas, conscious or not. The final lesson is unsettling. Time is not sacred. It is a tool, a weapon, and a canvas. Civilizations rise and fall, not just through war and famine, but through the stories they inherit and repeat. If memory is malleable, reality itself becomes negotiable. And in that negotiation, some truths are amplified while others are quietly erased. Look around you today. Monuments, maps, and archives all tell one version of events. But what about the stories that didn't survive? The civilizations that vanished without a trace? The secrets locked away under oceans or behind iron gates? History is alive, but it is also fragile. And the machinery that controls it is older, quieter, and more powerful than most of us dare imagine. The past may be stranger than we think. Dive deeper into the mysteries of history and subscribe to uncover what's been hidden.